This is the Media Police Post from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this show, we police the state of truth in the Republic. And because truth is communicated to us by journalists and analysts, we have made it our civic duty to put it to the test. We advance from two confirmed truths about the media. One, and in the words of Roger Stone, the media is either lazy or evil. And for the most part, it is both evil and lazy. That is why the truth, their truth, must be put to a test. Two, another confirmed truth is that journalism is verified gossip. In fact, what is presented to us as news analysis is gossip that has been verified by journalists. This gossip has to be ground truthed. We will monitor columnists. We will assess the state of truth in what they submit to the Republic, and we will pass verdict on what is true and what is not. For the record, we are not journalists. We are thinkers. We are not lazy or evil, and we do not verify gossip. What we give you is the truth that sets you free. On today's show, we will discuss either our favorite columns of last week or columns which reflected unformed and uninformed opinions, and columns that have made you stupid. These are columns that fell into the cognitive trap of we see things as we are, not as they are, or those that are based on conjecture history. Lastly, they're the ones that smack of envelope journalism. Welcome, GK and CS. What will we be reviewing today?
Vladimir Lenin, in describing the Bolshevik Revolution, poetically offered that there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. This week, we were consumed by the fervor of a weekend where decades unfolded. Decades of stupidity and decades of grand truths. I will begin with decades of stupidity. There is this self-appointed public intellectual who thinks with his mouth open, and when he switches off his brain, he forgets to switch off his Twitter mouth. The fellow likes to run his mouth on Twitter. His name is David Day or something like that. He also owns some gutter press called The Elephant. And we invite him to read The Rhino, our e-newsletter, which speaks facts to stupidity. This fellow, David Day, wrote an open letter to our leaders, urging them to pull the plug on BBI. This letter was both interesting and original, but the original parts were not interesting, and the interesting parts were not original. And this is why the letter made me feel stupid. It had more heat than logic, more emotions than reason, and more lamentations than solutions. It read like an epistle written by a junk prophet. And this is so because this David fellow used his heart to reason, yet the heart has no brain. It is just one big mass of muscle. Those who use it to reason tend to give in to mental illness or emotional disturbia. And the content of this letter exhibited symptoms of disturbia. We invite our viewers to read it, and while at it, we also invite this David fellow from Kiambu to tell you that a Kikuyu without a wheelbarrow is like a fish without a bicycle. Now, I will turn to the ground truths. Number one, RUTO is opposed to BBI because it is creating positions for others. Yet, the ground truth is that RUTO is opposed to BBI because he wants to preserve positions for himself. It is all about positions. Secondly, the First Amendment is meant to result in fairer and more proportional distribution of resources. This too is a ground truth. To better understand this, let us summon the evidence, and the verdict will be yours. Wajir and Garissa each have just over 300,000 people, and they each have 6 MPs. Compare that with Mombasa, which has 1.3 million people and also 6 MPs. What this means is that when the national government CDF is allocated, Mombasa is given the same amount as Wajir or Garissa, and that amount has to cater to 1 million more people. There are even more drastic examples. Garissa Township, represented by the former leader of Majority, Aden Duale, has 54,000 people, which is about the same as Kamenuad in Thika, represented by an MCA. The danger is that some Kenyans are more equal than others. And let us also remember that some regions, in addition to county revenue allocation and CDF, also receive a share of the equalization fund. The First Amendment seeks to remedy the imbalance through this cure courtesy of the BBI process. On average, majority of counties will benefit from more than double the required minimum allocation of money. More money going to Mashinani with fairer allocation. If BBI fails, however, then Kilifi, for example, loses out on a total of 17 billion. Mandera loses 16 billion. Meru loses 14 billion. If BBI fails, Kitui loses 16 billion. Kiambu loses 18 billion. And if BBI fails, Turkana loses 19 billion. Every single county loses billions if BBI fails. And so we ask, what is wrong with fixing this?
Indeed, what is wrong?
Yeah, and I think based on what you've just said, I think also the people of Kiambu will denounce David D.
The verdict is yours.
Some tough words to him, though, I have to admit.
Yes, let's not be distracted.
This week, I would like to look at 2 articles, both published in the Standard. The first is The Easy Way to Solve Gender Parity Riddle, written by a gentleman called Jeff Usaji, and it was published on the 29th of January. As read against How Women Stand to Gain from the Latest Push to Build Bridges, written by Priscilla Nyakabi, and this was published yesterday on Sunday. Mr. Usaji is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi, and I'd like to say that he writes a little bit like an undergraduate student. They use extravagant prose meant to more to impress the average reader than explain their point. And this is what Mr. Usaji did. But I'd like to tell you that, as Albert Einstein taught us, if you cannot explain it simply, then you have not understood it well enough. By extension, therefore, we can say that Mr. Usaji was explaining something he has not understood well enough. That is why he had to cover it up with flamboyant verbosity. The reason why he made me feel stupid is because he was exchanging ignorance in broad daylight. On the contrary, Miss Nyokabi was practical and reasonable in her arguments. What she lacks in flowery language, she more than makes up for with a single-minded focus in delineating the gains for women in the proposed constitutional amendment. For Mr. Usaji, there are 2 distinct institutional defects in BBI: the lack of gender parity in parliament and blah, 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 plus a lot of English. He says BBI has not fully addressed the indictable absence of gender parity in both parliament and county assemblies. It would have been helpful if this constitutional review initiative had designed a novel electoral structure under which all neighboring constituencies or wards are paired. And then during the general election, one of the paired constituencies shall be required to field only women candidates, while the other electoral unit is exclusively reserved for male contestants. In the subsequent general elections, the gender rule would be switched, and blah, blah, blah. Let me explain this simply. to essentially mean that instead of a single member electorate, like what we have, one constituency, one MP, this would make the new combined constituency a multiple member electorate. And according to Mr. Osaji, this would spare me, the taxpayer, the meteoric spike in the budget at the two legislative levels. I have to agree, this sounds good, but to the unlearned reader. And I am a discerning reader, and I know that what he's pitching is only half the story. For his proposal to work, we would need to change our electoral system from the current first past the post, that's you vote, whoever gets the most votes wins, to proportional representation. Why? Because proportional representation systems are used for elections in multi-member electorates. How else will you know who really won the election? So for any hope of gender parity would be lost in the conversation about how we need to change our electoral system. I'd like to recommend to Mr. Osaji the article written by Professor Anyang Nyong'o in The Star. It was titled, "There Are Genuine BBI Critics and Oppositionists." It was published in November last year. In this piece, Professor Nyong'o proposed a pure parliamentary system. But, and I repeat, but, he acknowledged that we, as Kenyans, are not ready for such a system. He also said, and this is the point I'd like to emphasize, BBI is an intermediate regime that would help us create the political culture of inclusion before a pure parliamentary system or proportional representation or a multi-member constituency can be feasible. Mr. Osaji is a smoke and mirrors academic, and he would benefit from Professor Nyong'o's refined thinking and Ms. Nyokabi's practicality. We recommend that he reads a book. Then maybe he will not make us feel stupid.
Fantastic.
On her part, Ms. Nyokabi outlines the gains for women under the First Amendment to the Constitution. And one gain in particular that sticks out for me is in the current iteration of BBI is the proposal that Senate has a balanced 50-50 representation of elected men and elected women. This allows women equal power in determining county allocations. And women senators can also ring-fence 5% of county funds for women's economic development. With the counties getting 35% of the overall allocation, and that accounts to about 500 billion shillings, if we set aside 5% of this amount, then women could get 25 billion shillings. But let me flip this, because according to prospect theory, we as human beings best respond to investment decisions in terms of gains and losses. If BBI fails, dear women, we have lost 25 billion shillings countrywide.
Wow.
Explain that to the next generation.
Wow. I'll take the 25 billion.
Any day.
This week, I looked at an article in The Star, and it was titled, Sagana 3 Meeting Will Balkanize the Country Deeper. And this was by Odiambo Jamwa, in which he proposes that a tax on RUTO will snowball to a dangerous level that may resurrect the ghosts of tribal tiff. This article did little to improve ignorance. It was too simple in its logic, argument, and facts. It offered no solution, and even my shosho, my grandmother, she agrees. His hypothesis that anybody who goes to Central without passing through certain individuals is an enemy, Uhuru is perpetuating the politics of kingship. And so I ask, what is wrong with that? The author makes it seem as though this is something that is bad. Yet in my opinion, kingship is what leadership is about. A good leader undertakes a unifying role that acts as a value reference for the various groups that constitute the society. Uhuru is attempting to do this not just for Central Kenya, but all of Kenya through BBI. And then the author tells us, even as everything is blamed on RUTO, the president is silently redirecting vast resources to the restive region to try and assuage the public anger and tame the growing rebellion. He concludes that such unwarranted tensions must be avoided, and to do this, the president must tower above ethnic schisms. Even the county governments that won't be receiving a huge chunk of their portion will be expected to gleefully support the BBI changes thanks to weaponization of sleaze as a tool for whipping their support every time they show signs of rebellion. The BBI referendum is reaching a crucial stage and a lot of drama will be inevitable going by the selfish determination by its proponents to pass it. A mouthful. But firstly, I must ask myself, and I must ask on behalf of the audience, what does Jamwa actually mean by weaponization of sleaze? Is he just pimping pompous ignoramus of verbiage? Weaponized, we know, is a trendier modern version for the word politicized. It is used by people as a means of discrediting an allegation or an argument. But what is this sleaze he talks of? What is actually being weaponized? If it is resources that he speaks of, then I must give Jamwa a reality check. Because surely an astute politician, such as Uhuru, must incentivize counties to vote in favor of what he wants. And what better way to do it than by demonstrating the actual gains of BBI? Then Jamwa attempts to decipher the Sagana declarations, and he tells us that as the clock ticks towards the 2022 general election, President Kenyatta is increasingly growing wary of his dwindling fortunes in vote-rich Mount Kenya region as DP William Ruto's star is getting brighter. It gets brighter. But is it really this simple? To me, it smacks of envelope journalism. No history, no context, no facts, just M-Pesa. And I suggest we turn to a book called The Lucifer Principle. It's one of our favorites by Harold Bloom, and it is important for us because it teaches us that in politics, goodness attracts nothing but evil. And because Uhuru has been good, he has attracted evil. And because Ruto has been politically evil, he has attracted the good hearts of the Kikuyus. But remember, you cannot buy a Kikuyu, you can only
Rent one.
Yes. So once upon a time, a scorpion asked a frog to help it cross the river. The frog was hesitant, but because it was good-natured, like Uhuru, it finally agreed. However, the frog gave a single condition to the scorpion. It promised to carry the scorpion so long as the scorpion did not sting it, and to this, the scorpion agreed. The two started crossing the river, but midstream, the scorpion could not control its urges. It stung, and stung the trusting frog. Before the frog died, it asked the scorpion, "Why did you do it?" And the scorpion replied, "I could not help myself. It is just in my nature." And Kikuyus are like this frog, and Ruto is like the scorpion. He will sting them because it is in his nature. But then again, maybe the Kikuyus are like the scorpion, and Ruto is a frog, and will sting him. The big question therefore is this: who will sting who? For there will be stinging, for sure.
I have no comment.
None?
Though I do have to say,
Yes.
I will repeat, you
Yes.
cannot own a Kikuyu, you can only rent one.
Yes.
This reminds me of a movie titled The Scorpion King.
Yes.
It did not end well.
It
for the
didn't,
Scorpion
it didn't end well.
Thank you for joining us on Media Police Posts. Columnists, join us next week. We have put you on notice.